Well, good morning from Toronto, where I am this morning. I'm Laura Zizzo. I'm the founder and chief strategy officer here at Manifest Climate. I am so excited to be your host today for the webinar where we'll be unveiling the latest updates in ESG AI. Very excited to see many of you joining us and looking forward to a good, robust conversation where we're sharing our Manifest compliance product today. And I have my esteemed colleague, Pete Richardson, with us here today. He is head of research, and Pete spent the first part of his career as a lawyer and partner at a global law firm. And he's been working with us for the last number of years to expertly map the regulations into our AI models. So this product launch is a real celebration of his and the team's very diligent work to share this with you today. It's exciting time for us, as I've said. Pete, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Lauren. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's joining us. I'm very excited.
Yes. Awesome. Okay, a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Don't worry about making notes throughout the webinar. We'll send a recording in the next day or so. And if you have questions, there's a Q&A function in Zoom. We'd be happy to try to answer those live or follow up with you afterwards. So please communicate. We love it hearing from you. So if we go on to the next slide, we'll see what the agenda is going to be today. Don't need to spend too much time on this. Let's get into a little bit more about Manifest Climate. So how did we get here? I've always been passionate about connecting the dots on climate change to business decision makers through first law and policy as a lawyer by training, then management consulting, and now through technology and AI to allow for that scale we need to really come to terms with the big changes we're going to see in the market. And since 2015, me and the team of consultants have been working on streamlining and understanding of climate-related financial reporting. We did a lot of manual research and gap analysis, and we had the idea that we could use technology to be much more efficient and effective here. So in 2020, we started a pretty major transition from consulting firm to technology company. We raised venture capital and got to work investing in the best in the world technology development, translating our climate expertise into software using best available AI. And with the advancements in AI over the years, we've been able to move faster than I ever thought possible, and even move beyond our initial focus on climate to be able to provide AI-enabled analyst capabilities across all ESG factors. The pains that we felt from our past and what we've heard from the network that brought us to where we are today helps us feel very confident in what we're unveiling to you today, our new product, Manifest Compliance. So I say we don't want you to have to control F through disclosure documents anymore. We've trained the model to do that for you so you can do the important work of solving problems. So on the next slide, this is what we are. We're the leading ESG regulatory compliance software, empowering decision makers with AI-powered gap analysis and expert insights for fast, accurate, and seamless compliance with global standards. And that's just scratching the surface of what we can do with this technology. And it's really moving beyond just like this maze of what do I pay attention to? There's so much chaos out there. We want to make clarity out of that. And that's really where the name Manifest came from. Clarity through the noise, seeing through what we know to be important and really having that clarity so we can get to compliance, we can get to better decision making. And the other kind of thing I like to say about the naming of Manifest, we had a leap in civilization when we had the shipping manifest, when we could understand what ships were bringing into port. And now we know with climate and with ESG and with all the changes that are happening so rapidly in the market, we need to know what's coming into port. And we think we can use AI and train that AI with our expertise to really make more clarity out of all of this chaos and understand what's coming in to port. So on the next slide, we're hearing from our clients that this is really needed because this stuff is complex. It takes a long time. Manual gap analysis often takes months to complete. It can be a real drag on efficiency. And with manual reviews, they're more prone to inconsistencies, right? Because people kind of think about things differently. A lot of these questions are subjective in nature, which Pete's going to talk about how we deal with that a bit later. And especially as talent is continuing to be developed in this space, there's not a lot of folks that have been doing this for a very long time. It's new. So there are a few real experts that can drive consistent results. We hear this as a pain point from our clients and prospects time and time again. So how does our solution actually help this? We are seeing a lot of uptake with consulting teams. Our tools can help ensure consistency of approach. You can have one source of centralized data. You can have these compliance assessments done instantly instead of waiting weeks for the results to come back. And you can feel a sense of trust because we built it with our ESG expertise. It's not going to be perfect, right? Like nothing is, but we're working towards getting it closer to perfect every day. And the experts are building our expertise into the model as quickly as we can. And you're getting consistency in approach and that accuracy level that makes you confident that you can trust the technology. So before we show you what it looks like, I'm going to pass it to Pete to discuss how our methodology works and why it's so important. So over to you, Pete.
Thanks, Laura. As I say, I'm excited to be here. It's kind of an interesting webinar for me because normally when I go on these kinds of webinars, I'm explaining the latest development in this or that. And to talk about it ourselves, really, to say, hey, here's the latest development as to what we have been doing, is rather an uncomfortable position for someone like me who's a very bad salesman. So let's put that to one side and let's focus on what I do best, which is actually figuring out how we put the architectures together to create the product that we have. And there are really three big questions that we've been asking ourselves for the last, frankly, number of years. Laura's been doing it a lot longer than I have, but even in the last 3 or 4 years, when we made the pivot, we've always asked ourselves, what should we focus on? Where should we put our eggs? And there's some cautionary tale there because even back the last 2 or 3 years, we were, I would say, pioneers in looking at NLP models, natural language processing, machine learning, and we were working really hard to try and get good results from that. And then, of course, AI comes along and sort of changes the game. But even with that additional sort of power behind us, we still needed to figure out where we put our eggs. Is it to change behavior, to focus on transparency? And the second question, once we figured that part out, how detailed should we go? Because we find where we're trying to meet the market where they're at, some of the market knows exactly what they need, and others of the market are just getting started. So should we go light to capture the widest audience, or go heavy and try and sort of pull in those who are still getting started? And thirdly, and critically for a software company, how much customization is right? Because of course, organizations are as varied as they are numerous. So, as I say, we spent a number of years working on these problems, and the big answers that we have, at least for now, is, as Laura says, we're going to focus on compliance. And we've sort of started with one of the hardest problems of all, which is the European regulations and rules around disclosure standards. So you'll hear lots of acronyms. We don't necessarily need to get into them, but all you need to know is we're starting with the hardest rules, what we think. We're taking an approach that really pushes transparency. And again, there's a cautionary tale. And I'm sometimes too candid about what we do well and what we do poorly. But in the past, we developed what we called a common ground methodology, and we found that was tricky for folks to understand. So now we are focused exclusively on the standards. We have the ability to be absolutely transparent, both in terms of the push, the regulations coming into the product, and the pull, which means how the product is doing the work. So we can get into that in more detail as we need. Then how detailed should we go? Well, has to be detailed enough for compliance, but not too detailed. So, you always hear the sort of phrase, why ask 10 questions when one would do? Here, interestingly, that true does hold true, but there's also certain cases, and we'll get onto this, why ask one question when you really need to ask 10? So first and foremost, our approach is to get the answer as right as it can be. And I think one thing you'll hear both Laura and I echo here is this is as bad as it's ever going to be, which I appreciate is not a great sales pitch. But the point is, we are extremely good. We are class leading. We know this actually because we pit humans against machines and against other providers all the time. And so we have actually pretty good data on that. We've got huge validation sets and hundreds of thousands of queries that we've done. And then how much customization is right? Well, everyone wants something different, but we're not consultants. So the difference, it really is between configuration versus customization. And we can get more into that as we go on to the next slide. And the next slide is really about, how it works structurally. We've sort of got here, what you're looking at is upstream, midstream, and downstream layers. Those of you with a sort of oil and gas background, that upstream, midstream, downstream is purely coincidental. But to develop what we have developed actually has required us to do a number of sort of novel things to develop the ability to collect documents in a consistent and efficient way. Well, that's meant developing a proprietary scraper to actually allow us to get documents, but as well as that, allowing folks and users to manipulate what documents go in if they want to configure, certain documents to be counted or not. And then to develop a whole review engine to ask the right questions. That's really at the upstream level. That's the cleanest. We're very keen on making sure we have clean data. At the midstream level, then, you'll see on the left-hand side a clear distinction between compliance and on the right-hand side, analytics. So compliance meaning, how well or poorly a company or an organization is tracking vis-a-vis any given standard. That is, as clean as it possibly can be. We can provide auditable, effectively, reviews of standards and the disclosures against those standards. And we have a number of very large consulting firms that actually are using that in just that use case. On the right-hand side, then, the analytics side is more curated. And by curation, I mean the things that people really want to focus on, either to engage or to follow stewardship approaches in terms of the data. Today, we're focusing on compliance, but the same review engine can power analytics, and that's what really gets us excited. And then downstream, of course, how do you actually get the data into the right place? Well, we can deliver it via the product itself, but we can also do other various methods of delivery that are more direct, whether it's just straight downloads or other agile ways of getting into your hands. So, I mean, when we think about how it works, we've been asked, why can't you just take the data points you have, and maybe we can flip onto the next slide and generate, chat GPT questions out of it. Well, we actually tested that. Doesn't work. It doesn't work for a number of reasons. Firstly, there's a huge amount of data. If you take the European rules, for example, depending on which standards you look at, there are 1,200 or so data points plus, and you have to actually have an architecture behind those. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but we're very happy to do that, as Laura will attest, on separate calls. But when you look at any given data point, and here we're using the European rules just as an example, you have a kind of what's called a disclosure requirement. Tell me about your transition plan. And then you have specific data points that are underneath that disclosure requirement. Okay, give me a summary of that transition plan. And on the right-hand side, just at that data point level, tell me about your locked-in emissions that actually may jeopardize you achieving change. Well, that's at the data point level, and that's mostly what people see. But you can't actually get good results unless you go one level deeper. And that one level deeper is really the questions that you ask to interrogate the documents that you want to actually review as part of your assessment. So when we look at something like the one on the left, which is to say, tell me something about your transition plan, that is kind of a one for the data point. The one on the right, though, that's very different, because when the data point looks at what are your locked-in emissions, how do they impact your GHG targets, how do they jeopardize your ability to transition? Well, there are 3 questions there. So if you ask just one question, you're going to get the wrong answer. So again, this is just a snippet of how we approach these questions. We're more than happy to get into more detail, but I think what you really want to see is the product itself. So I'm going to pass back to Laura.
Dun, 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 dun. Okay, thanks, Pete. And you can see what he just described on that last slide with like all the questions that go into one requirement. We've now done that for 1,174 of the data points CSRD and the hundreds other that go with IFRS and the other standards we'll talk about in a bit. So a lot of work went into being able to offer this today, and we'll get into the next slide. And this is what it looks like. So we heard from our clients over the last number of years, we want more control. over what we review. So you are now able to upload documents. You're able to create your own assessments. The power is in the client's hand now with the compliance product to upload documents or pick from what Pete alluded to. We've already found in our database from our scraper. You don't have to rely on the Manifest Climate team to now do the behind the scenes document organization, which you used to in the past. Now you can do that. You can build an assessment and you can upload these documents, and they stay in a private space. We have our SOC 2 Type 2 compliance. They stay in a private space, so you can feel confident uploading documents that are draft or that are internal policies and see where those documents actually have the data points that align with the regulatory framework. So you're not starting from scratch. We're actually doing the hard work of seeing what you already have or what's available in the market and running it through our assessment. So once you've picked what documents are part of the assessment, you go on to the next stage. And this is where the customization gets really powerful in the compliance module and product that we now have. You can select whatever data points you want from CSRD or the other standards and run that in the assessment. So you just have a group of documents. You can have, multiple documents. You can have one document. And now you can say, out of that document, show me where and if it has these data points mentioned. You can run the whole CSRD assessment, so the whole 1,174 data points, or you can just focus on climate, or you can just focus on specific things you've already determined have passed the threshold for materiality if you've already done your double materiality assessment. Or you can look at, I want to understand what my peers are doing. So lots of customizable ways of understanding what data points you want to look at for each assessment. Once you've created an assessment that you like, you can also save this as a template so that you can have those data points ready to go for future assessments. So I'm selecting my data points. I want to run my assessment. I run assessment, and then what happens? You have your results available. And we're really proud to be working with some of the best models in the business, getting lots of capacity so that we can provide a very quick turnaround. And it's almost instantaneous that you get these review results. So you're not waiting the 8 weeks that it sometimes takes or more for a gap analysis to be conducted. We're going to be able to give you something that shows how many of those data points that you just selected are found in the documents as part of your assessment. We're going to show you what documents we reviewed and an overview here. And then you can get into the details. So out of those potentially thousands of data points you run through the assessment, you're going to get a line like this for each of those data points in the module. It looks similar to what some of you we know you do internally with your Excel documents. We've tried to make this as kind of recognizable, but more user-friendly than just using Excel. So we're showing you what requirement it came for, what requirement it was looking for in the assessment, what that data point was doing, and did we find something? Was this likely met, partially met, or not found? You're going to see one of those determinations for each of the data points that were run in the assessment. And then if you click into any of those assessments, those detailed data points, you're going to get this. So you're going to get a detailed deep dive and audit ready page for each of the data points that we ran in that assessment, where you'll get some specific examples of what that requirement is. It's the data point ID you're seeing there. It's the unique reference to that regulatory requirement. If you want to understand that regulatory requirement more, we have more information there on the left side of the screen. And you can actually even link to the document to really understand that. So no more like searching for where did CSRD say this thing? What did it actually mean? It's all there, linked to the data point. We're going to show you the status. So this one is a partially met in our view. We're going to get the AI generated summary. So what's the gist of what the AI determined from this data point being analyzed in your assessment? Why did we say it's partial? So in this case, we're saying, Unilever's climate transition plan was mentioned, but there was not clear specific actions. So our determination is that it was not fully met. It was partially met. And you can go and look at the specific direct quotes, both pulled out into the UI, but also linked out to the document. And that's something like I think us as lawyers, Pete, we're so proud of that we have that source traceable background. We're not aware of any other product that does that. So our database holds all the documents that you've put into the assessment, and we're going to give you that point source reference. Before I move on, maybe we can go back one slide. And I wanted to ask Pete, we get a lot of questions around what is partial, what is likely. So how did we determine how to use those tags? And can you tell us a little bit more about them?
Yeah, happy to do that. So yeah, the sort of three tags, if you like, likely met, partial, or not found. I'll go through them each one. But I think it's when you think about this, why is it such a problem? Because the reason being, you have quantitative data points and you have qualitative data points. Quantitative data points are fairly easy. You know, what's your scope one emissions, whatever it might be. Quantitative is much harder. It's less subjective, and we are trying to create as much objectivity as we can. So what likely met means it's not a definitive statement of compliance, but what it does say is that based on our criteria, the elements of the disclosure satisfy the corresponding disclosure obligation. And actually, that's a fairly specific and precise determination, because the standards, particularly the ones that are, as I mentioned earlier, the hardest, they include so much detail as to what a good process looks like or a good policy looks like. And even on the quantitative side, they distinguish between, you know, if you're expressing an energy determination, distinguish between megawatt hours as opposed to gigawatt hours, terawatt hours, or gigajoules. The last of those things are not acceptable, right? So actually what we're doing is not just asking questions, we're also assigning, if you like, acceptance criteria to the answers that we can start juggling to make sure that we're getting our assessments right. So partial, so that's likely. Partial then is there can be a number of elements that make up a data point. So in the earlier slide, I showed you at least three as they related to locked-in emissions. Now, if some of those are met, but not all of them, well, that's your partial answer. So some of the elements of the data point have been met, but not all of them. And then not found, of course, is that our review hasn't found the relevant data. Now, it's important to note that doesn't mean that it's not disclosed. What it means, though, is it's not either not disclosed at all or not disclosed in a way that we've been able to identify using our models. And that's just I'll pause for 1 second. Well, how good are your models? Well, very good. And the reason we know that is because as I mentioned, we test against sort of benchmark, both against sort of what we see in the market, but also internally. So there's an interesting dynamic, sort of a competition, if you like, between humans and the accuracy of our models. And there's actually a kind of a nice interplay now. There was a time when humans were always better than computers at chess. And then eventually the computers took over, but there was a period where a human plus a computer was always better than a computer because it would add the nuance and the detail that was so useful to actually playing well. That's really the condition that we're in now. We're finding that the models are helping us to identify systemic problems, and humans are able to correct for those. And what we found actually, and I'll speak to just one last anecdote before I hand back, Laura, is one of our regulator clients really likes how we were approaching this sort of the coupling of the question set with the acceptance criteria, such that every single determination of likely met, partial, or not found is backed up by a very clear, very auditable assessment of criteria. Again, I can't stress this enough. We are not trying to make anything up here. We are trying to be fully auditable at this stage of the process.
Amazing. Yeah, and that goes to one of the questions that came through. Is it audit? Would it pass an external audit? This is a tool to empower audits. We are not auditors, but we are being used by auditors to make their processes much more efficient. So we think it's a great first start. It does, as Pete mentioned, need a human to review it to be audit quality, because the software shouldn't, we're lawyers, shouldn't do the full audit. We need to have our brains on it, but it's going to make that process way easier, way more streamlined, and hopefully a lot more quick and more consistent, which is what we're really excited about. So really proud of what we've been able to do here and know that it's only going to get better from here. So gap analysis, consulting teams, sustainability teams, love to see your feedback on how this supports your workflow, and we hope it will. But there is other use cases too. So if we flip forward, I want to show you the more innovation that we've had around. Now we have all this information in a database. How do we empower our users to search through this information and find a lot more insight into what we found, more than just a gap analysis, but let's actually empower more decision making. So the next slide shows what we've been building. We understand that there's a lot of interesting things you can do with this information. You can use it to prospect clients. So one of our clients has actually asked for their whole, most important clients, this is a consulting firm, to be put into the system so that they can actually find business opportunities. Where can they actually see clients are missing something and we could help them develop that governance strategy, or maybe they need to improve their transition planning. So they're going to have a rapid way of understanding where the gaps exist across various organizations. You can also benchmark. So compare results across multiple regulations, multiple clients, and see these data points at a glance. So you'll be able to use Disclosure Search to go and find specific elements. And you see we have transition plan put in to the search bar here. You're going to see where we found reference to that across multiple disclosure data points and use that in a multitude of ways. You can also do research. So I know this from my law and consulting days, showing what peers are doing is often the fastest way to get executives to understand they need to do more. So show what your peers are doing on their executive comp strategies or how they're talking about biodiversity metrics, and be able to do that very quickly without a lot of manual research that may not be budgeted. And you can upskill your team quickly. So teams are using this to make sure that we understand what is happening out there in the market. What does good look like? How do we see what the leaders are doing? And how do we do that at a very efficient and cost-effective way? And then seeing how other people are actually talking about this. So guidance and examples of how others are reporting, how they're talking about this. I remember, early days of thinking about climate change, going to a board of a insurance company and just showing them what one of their peers said. And I just kind of sat back and saw the discussion of the board say, oh, we can do that. This is our thing too. So we want to empower that and get what everyone is already saying out in the public markets into decision makers' hands so they can be inspired to act and do more as well. Another example of this is working with a major American financial institution that's using Disclosure Search to vet and compare suppliers. So it's helping them ensure a more sustainable supply chain. We're very curious as to how you would use this, and that'll bring us to the next part of this webinar where we're going to engage you for a bit. So please let us know, when would you find the compliance module most useful? When conducting compliance audits internally or behalf of clients, when building an ESG strategy, when drafting a disclosure report, or other. And then we'll still keep the poll up, but we'll switch to the next slide if you can. Also in that poll, we're asking you, how would you benefit most from Disclosure Search? Are you inspired by the benchmarking or client prospecting capabilities, the ability to do research, seeing examples of reporting, or using it for engagement and vetting of portfolios and suppliers? Or is there something else that we didn't mention? Thank you for taking a vote. Okay. Are we going to see the results, or shall I just go on? Ah, there they are. That's very interesting. Okay, so there's lots of great use cases. And we're seeing a lot of interest in benchmarking. Okay, well, thank you. We can close that poll. Okay, and now what's coming next? So we know that this is just the start of what we can do with the power of the LLMs trained by our expertise. So, Pete, what do we have to look forward to?
Thanks, Laura. Well, it's interesting, right? Because when we first started this pivot, we got really detailed on at what was then the sort of the vanguard of standards, which was the TCFD, Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And we went really detailed. And then we sort of stepped back and said, look, we can't run this at scale. The technology is not there. So we went a little bit lighter, and we sort of pared that down to sort of 40 key indicators. Um, and that was okay because it allowed us to create assessments at scale. But it wasn't detailed enough for a lot of folks. And that's why, again, the launch that's coming up now gets back into what I love best, which is the real detail behind compliance. So if we flip to the next slide, what that really means is that now for the first time, we will be able, or we can, look at a atomic level, if you like, between each of the key standards that are out there. So, for example, as I mentioned, we started with the European standards, and then some of our European clients are saying, okay, well, we're starting with Europe, but how do we now report against IFRS, right? And previously we'd said, well, if you report against Europe, you're pretty good against IFRS. Turns out that's not true. Well, it largely is true, but parts of it are not true. There are meaningful differences between Europe and IFRS as they relate to transition plans, scenario analysis, industry-based metrics, GHG disaggregation. The list goes on, and we can only make those detailed assessments because we have, as I say, atomized the standards and asked questions and put in criteria at the data point level. So, we've done Europe. We've done the interoperability between Europe and IFRS, and now we're rolling out IFRS as an independent review. And then all of these others that you see on screen. And you might see one at the bottom there, SB 261, which is California. And you think, well, goodness, we've just had an election. Is climate still a thing? Well, it turns out it is still a thing. And we do have a number of clients that are asking us for this, which is a segue to, this is our working pipeline. If anyone on this call has others they'd like to see, please do tell us, because we can and probably will respond to your request. So that's by way of additional standards that are coming to the platform. And again, for the first time, we can do that at the granular data point level, which is good, but there's more. So we flip to the next slide. And what I mean by more is, well, firstly, there are some features here that we can deliver through direct API. But the one that I'm really interested in is that second bullet point, which is how do you compare things year over year? I can tell you how fast I run the 100-meter sprint in, but you'll have no idea whether that's good or bad compared to what I was doing last year or next year. So this year-on-year comparison, we've already shown it, and we're working with a few asset managers to demonstrate the power of this. And it really is remarkable because you can see trend lines, and it doesn't have to be perfect. Again, Laura says, this is, continuous improvement is better than delayed perfection for any Mark Twain fans out there. But, you can see a trend line like this or a trend line like this, and it's really revealing, and it's surprising how little information you need to start making interesting reviews. More on that, by the way. That's a teaser for a white paper that's coming out.
Can I add up to something
Yeah.
here? I'm so
Yeah.
excited by this one because I just want to make absolutely clear something that I probably was remiss to talk about in how we pick data points for assessments. You don't need to have a compliance assessment to get really interesting comparable data. So in this example that Pete was just talking about with asset managers, we're just pulling out sometimes 50 to 100 data points that are specific to transition plan or biodiversity or governance. So we're going to be able to have these comparable data sets for hopefully thousands of companies. That's coming very quickly, that compare year over year and provide that ESG data that we talked about, that database of ESG information. And it doesn't have to be overwhelmingly thousands of data points. It can be the specific data points that you're most interested in. So I'm very, very excited about the curation of that. And then specifically creating custom mapping and custom methodologies, which we're already doing for a number of clients. We can kind of create your own version of what you're looking for. And now that we've been able to so quickly map, we're starting to do that for clients on an ad hoc basis, but that may become a more widespread feature over time.
Yeah, and that can happen if you ask the same questions. You can say, "Well, I'd like to be a particularly hard marker," or you know what, I'd rather just get a transparent view, so I'll just let anything through. So you can start. There is different sort of paths you can do in terms of configuration or customization. So getting our disclosure assessments up to speed with sort of the new formats that are around, but sort of gathering speeds, XBRL. It is worth noting that what we do is investigate or interrogate documents that either are in draft, i.e., publication, already out there in the market. We don't do materiality assessments, ourselves. That is not, and it's always important to sort of say what you do and what you don't do. I always think, but what we are starting to do or thinking about doing is pulling things like materiality integrations into our own assessments, so we can get a more nuanced view. And of course, audit trail uploads. Again, I think I've stressed this throughout this presentation. We don't want to make anything up. We want to make sure that you have a clear line of sight as to what we're looking at, why we're looking at it, and how we've come to the conclusions that we have. And that is actually quite different from what we've done in the past. And it's a really exciting move that really appeals to the lawyer in me. But again, all of this is really driven by you. So if you have other ideas, we actually have a relatively sophisticated way of now building, what's coming next in the platform. But if you have ideas, then we'd love to hear from you. Again, I'm a terrible salesman, but wait, there's more. So I'm going to just go ahead and do it. We actually do have an opportunity here for you, and we're going to offer this, and we want to get you out of here promptly. But just to finish off, we are giving away 3 free trials. And showing on screen now, you can either say, yes, I'd like to have a chance to win that free trial, to come onto the platform and start playing around with it. And you can say, enter me to win. Or if you're not interested, say no, thank you. And if you don't answer, it will be a no, thank you. We're gonna leave this open just for a little bit. So even if you haven't had the time to sort of click enter me to win on this, you can always write to us and or see us at GreenBiz next week, where we'll be. So we will pull the draw, I think, at the next Thursday, February 13, and then we'll sort of pick 3 folks at random to join in the free trial. So we're really excited about this. It should, I think you probably got that from Laura, from me. I'll leave Laura to give the last word, but we're very proud as well what we've built. So Laura.
Absolutely. Thanks, Pete. And good luck, everyone, on that draw. Thank you for joining. And I'm afraid that that's all the time we have for the live webinar today. If anyone would like to continue the conversation further, we're recording this, and we'll send you an email and you can reply to that and have more conversations as well. I'd like to thank you all for your time today. We've loved learning from you over the last few years, and we can't be more excited, as Pete said, about where we are today and the launch of Manifest Compliance happening next week. It's been an amazing time to get to this place. We can't wait for you guys to get your hands on the new tool and tell us what you love, what you want us to improve. We love to hear from you. And thank you. And on behalf of the amazing team at Manifest Climate, I'd like to wish you all a lovely rest of your day. Thank you.